Last week I promised some of the more ghastly ghost stories I got here. Um, so I teased last week I was going to read a story from Scottish Ghost Stories, and I found it. I wasn't able to find it last week, but the funny thing is that you see this little bookmark here. Yeah, I had that right where the story started. So turned out, past me was looking out for current me, but current me didn't know the significance of that. Okay. Yeah, this is Scottish Ghost Stories by James Robertson, and this isn't a book of folklore. I kind of wish I did have one of Scottish folklore that was a little more on the horror side, but in this case, this is a documented case of what they believe was a ghost, or maybe it wasn't just a ghost. All right. Now I'm not going to read the whole chapter called "The House of Andrew Mackie." If you have a copy, I'm basically going to kick in with the Andrew Mackie case. There's some, uh, yeah, yeah. There's some preamble and other talks about some of the cases before it starts. So, okay. The house, which was inhabited by a mason and farmer called Andrew Mackie, stood near what is now Collin Farm, and in the early months of 1695, he and his family were subjected to an almost constant barrage of abuse from a disturbed spirit of some kind. A full account of this haunting was written by one of the principal witnesses, the Reverend Alexander Telfair, and was published as a pamphlet titled A True Relation of an Apparition, Expressions and Actings of the Spirit, which infested the house of Andrew Mackie in Rehincroft of Stocking, in the Park of Warwick, in the Stewartry of Crooked Brightshire. I almost thought I was going to have trouble reading that last word, but okay. It's from this narrative that most of the following is taken. The first sign of trouble came in February. Andrew Mackie discovered that some of his young beasts had broken their tethers during the night and were loose in the byre. Next night he retied them with stronger tethers, but in the morning he found them loose again. This happened a third time, after he had secured them with still stronger tethers, at which point Mackie began to wonder if there was some power at work stronger than just that of the animals themselves. He moved them from the byre on the fourth night. Next day he found one beast tied with a hair tether to the balk or tie beam of the house. The tether was just long enough to stretch from the balk hooked in the roof to the creature's neck, leaving it barely on the ground so that it could not move at all, but otherwise it was unhurt. A few nights later, while the family was asleep, the contents of a back wheel of peats was piled up in the middle of the house and set alight. The Mackies were alerted by the thick smoke and managed to put the fire out before the house caught fire, but no one had heard or seen anything. On Tuesday, 7th, the March, the first salvo of what would become a regular bombardment of stones began. Stones were thrown in every part of the house, but from where, or by whom, or by what could never be identified. This continued off and on for the next 4 days, with particular intensity at night time. On Saturday, the 11th of March, when all of the adults were outside working, and the children in the house came in and saw what looked like a figure sitting by the fireside, draped in a blanket. The youngest child, a boy of 9 or 10, chided the others for being afraid, and then seeing the blanket was his, blessed himself and ran forward to grab it. "Be what it will," said he, "it hath nothing to do with my blanket." Underneath was only a 4-footed stool that had been turned upside down. Realized I hadn't opened up my dashboard on the app yet. At my people if they want to come by. On the Sunday, the pot cook and pot clips went missing, and were only found 4 days later by two neighbors in a loft, a place that had been searched thoroughly several times before. The stone throwing intensified on this day, and it was observed that the stones that hit anyone weighed only about half of what one would expect. Also, if the throwing was at its worst on this and other Sabbaths, particularly when the family was at prayer, when the person praying would be the prime target. After church, Andrew Mackie sought out the minister, Mr. Telfair, and told him what was happening. 2 days later, Telfair called at the house and discussed the matter at length with his parishioner. No particular reason why the Mackie should be on the receiving end of some strange goings on. Later, some would claim that Mackie, as a Mason, had dedicated his firstborn child to the devil, but Telfair dismissed this notion. Andrew Mackie was a decent, upright, and religious man. Another theory advanced was that a woman of dubious character had at one time left a bundle of clothing at the house, which, after her death, the Mackies had kept for themselves. Mackie stoutly denied this. The bundle had never been undone and had been returned to the dead woman's friends. Nothing of hers remained in the house. There was, however, a third possible explanation. Several years earlier, the house had been lived in by a man called McNaught. No matter how hard he strove, McNaught's luck was always against him. He suffered poor health, and nothing ever seemed to go right for him. In an effort to discover if he or the house was cursed in some way, he sent his oldest son to visit a noted witch or spaewife at the routing bridge in the parish of Iron Grey. His son did as he was bid, but on his return he went to a recruiting party, and having heard the spaewife's prescription, and perhaps as keen as his father to escape the bad luck at home, he enlisted in the army and was soon on his way to fight in Flanders. There, some months later, he met another young man from Merrick named John Reddick. Reddick was about to go home, so the son asked him to deliver the spaewife's message to his father. Beneath a stone slab at the threshold of the house, he would find a tooth, which was to burn. If this were not done, whoever occupied the house would not flourish. Reddick agreed to carry that message, but when he got home, he found that McNaught had died, and that the house was now lived in by one Thomas Telfair. Instead of telling the new occupant, Reddick took his story to the new lieutenant's namesake, the minister Alexander Telfair, who decided not to pursue the matter further. Thomas Telfair, however, got wind of the affair, raised a slab, and found beneath it something that might have once been a tooth. Whether it be whether human or animal, he could not tell. He threw it in the fire and saw it burn like a candle. This Thomas Telfair lived at Wincroft for several years and never experienced any trouble. Either the McNaught or the Mackie were a variety. It was only after Andrew Mackie became the lieutenant that the problems began again. All the time the minister was at the house that Tuesday, nothing untoward happened. Then, as he was taking his leave, standing at the barn end, he saw two little stones drop down on the croft a short distance away, and then immediately someone came rushing out of the house, crying that it was as bad as ever. Telfair went back inside and said some prayers, but was himself struck by some small stones. But for the rest of that week, all was quiet until the next Sabbath. This time the stones were larger and heavier. They rained down for the better part of 3 days. On Wednesday night, the minister stayed through the hours of darkness praying, and was hit not only by stones, but by other objects, and was beaten several times on the sides and shoulders by what seemed like a great staff, so hard that those who were present could hear the noise of their strokes. Something tore the side off the box bed and rapped on the chest and boards as one calling for access. 3 neighbors were witness to the events. That night, leaning on the bedside at prayer, Mr. Telfair felt something pressing up his arm and saw a little white hand and arm from the elbow down. Presently, it vanished. It was almost the only time that anything was seen during the whole business, except that once a friend of Mackie's claimed to see a young man, red-faced and with yellow hair, looking at the window, and on several occasions, Mackie, his children, and some neighbors all saw what looked like a boy of about 14, dressed in gray and with a bonnet on his head, who shortly disappeared. Next day, things got worse. Neighbors, including the landlord Thomas McElwain, and the previous tenant Thomas Telfair, were struck by stones and beaten with his staves, so severely they were forced to leave. Some were driven back by the onslaught before they could even get into the house. The trouble, as the minister described in his report, Made a little wound on there, said Andrew Mackie's brow. He had thrust several times at his shoulder, he not regarding, and at last it gripped him so by the hair that he thought something like the nails of fingers scratched his skin. Other victims were dragged up and down through the house by their clothes, and one man, John Cage, a member of Auchentown, was gripped so fiercely that he cried out for help, fearing he would have his side torn from him. That night the trouble lifted the bedclothes off the children while they slept and beat them about the hips, as if with a hand which was plainly heard by all the adults. The door bar was lifted and carried about the house by an invisible force. The chests and beds were rather gnarly with a staff, and the stones flew about the place. This went on for another few days until 2nd April, when during family prayers, a voice was heard crying, "Wisht! Wisht!" at the end of each sentence, so clearly that the dog barked and ran into the door excitedly, as if expecting to go hunting. Next day, the wishing continued, accompanied by whistling. On the 4th of April, several ministers gathered near Buto, near Habidi, 7 miles away, and there heard and encountered disturbances from Andrew Mackie and his landlord Charles McAlane. Two of the ministers, Andrew Ewart of Kells and John Murder of Crossmichael, returned to the house with Mackie and spent the night in prayer and fasting, but the trouble seeing him to resent this new intrusion. Rocks weighing up to 7 or 8 pounds were thrown at them. Mr. Ewart received 2 wounds to his head and had his wig pulled from while he prayed. Stone dry hopped into his handkerchief as he held it in front of him and whisked the handkerchief away. Mr. Murder was also beaten to the extent of being bruised and cut. The others in the house did not escape the violence either, and a live peat was thrown from the fire and among them. Whenever prayers were said, the trouble's fury increased until, as dawn broke and the people rose from their prayers, doors poured down from them like hail. Next day, some straw for a thatch lying in the yard was set on fire. By now, the disturbances were drawing attention far and wide, and that evening the house was full of curious and sympathetic neighbors who were run down by stones. Andrew Mackie's wife, going out to fetch some peats, felt a broad stone at the door wobble underfoot, though, to her knowledge, it had never been loose before. She said nothing in front of the crowd of people, but waited until early the next morning to investigate. When the house was quiet, she lifted the stone and found beneath it 7 small bones with blood and some flesh, all closed in a piece of old solid paper. The blood was fresh and bright. That would have troubled her, and being afraid, laid it all down again. She ran to the landlord's house at Colin, a quarter of a mile away, but it seemed she triggered something, for while Harsher was away, the stones flew about worse than ever before, together with fireballs, which went out as soon as they landed. One hot stone was thrown into the bed where the children were sleeping and burned through the bedclothes. The oldest boy, John, managed to get it out onto the floor, where it lay for more than an hour and a half when it was still got to be picked up by Charles McAlane. The spirit thrust the staff through the wall above the children as they lay cowering in bed, shaking it and groaning. McAlane tried to pray to quell the spirit, but it was not appeased until he picked up the bones found by Mrs. Mackie. The bones were sent at once to Reverend Telfair, who came over to the house to pray and was assailed by large stones. And the trouble subsided. Next day was a Sunday, and to form the stone throwing recommenced. William Macklin, a blacksmith, was cut on the head, and a plowshare and stone weighing more than 3 stone were thrown at him. 2 fires broke out, but were extinguished by neighbors. That evening, as the boy John Mackie was coming home, there was an extraordinary light fell about him, and went before him to the house with a swift motion. All night the home throwing continued. On the Monday morning, going down the close between the house and the setting, Andrew Mackie found a letter written and sealed with blood. On the back was written, "Please, thou shalt have to repent and net it well." And inside it read, "Woe be to the Scotland, repent and take warning, for the door of heaven are already barred against that I am him sent for warning. To the fairly to God, yet troubled shall this man be for her 20 days. A 3 repent, open Scotland or her host shall." I mean, okay. That might have sounded weird. It's written weird, okay? Perhaps murder had been done in the house at some time in the 28 years since it was built. All who had ever lived there were now summoned to appear for examination by the Reverend Telfair. Charles Macklin and others were required to touch the bones. Nothing came of this exercise, so the bones and letter were sent to a convention of ministers at Kirkard Bright, who appointed Telfair and 5 others to go to the house and spend as much time as possible there, praying and fasting. They arrived on 10th of April, but were Telfair. No sooner did I begin to open my mouth, but it threw stones at me, and all within the house, but still worse was him who was at duty. It came often with such force upon the house that it made all the house shake, and it broke a hole through the timber and thatch of the house, and poured in great stones. One of more than a quarter weight fell upon Mr. James Monty. He hit his back, yet he was not hurt. Through another with a great force at him, who was praying bigger than a man's fist, which hit him on the breast, yet he was neither hurt nor moved thereby. It brake down the barn door and mid-wall and threw stones up the house, but it did no great hurt. It gripped, it handled the legs of some as with a man's hand, it hoisted the feet of others while standing on the ground. Thus it did to William Lennox of Millhouse, myself, and others. In this manner it continued till 10 o'clock at night. 2 days of the struggle between ministers and trouble followed. Then neighbor Andrew Tate arrived to spend the night with the family. He brought his dog. He brought with him his dog, which on the way over had caught and killed a polecat. Entering the house, Tate threw the dead animal into a corner. 3 other men arrived to join in the prayers. As they prayed, the spirit beat them with the polecat and threw it down in front of them. The 3 were terrified, and then one of them, when he felt something like a hand thrust upon his clothes and into his pockets, was so upset that he was sick. On the Sunday 14th of April, some straw in the yard with starlight and the spade hurled at Andrew Mackie. A widow of meal sieve was flung about the house, and when Mackie he grabbed it by the rim, a struggle ensued, which ended when the mesh was ripped out of the rim, rolled up and torn at another man. The next day, other neighbors were attacked by stones, and their whistling, groaning, wishing colours, cries of "Bo, bo," and "Kick, cuck" were heard again. The Mackies had now been during this trouble for nearly 2 months. On the 16th of April, they had had enough and moved out. 5 neighbors stayed in the house, but experienced no disturbance during the night, although in the morning they found that their cattle had been thrown about while tied to their stakes, and that some had broken loose, so the family, somewhat prematurely, returned after a couple of days. Neither humans nor cattle were harmed that night, although the spirit apparently carried a bundle of straw from the stable out to a small sheep house and tied the sheep together in pairs with their straw ropes. After a couple of days, however, the fire raising, stone throwing, and beatings with staves began again. Now a voice could be heard through the whistling, saying, "Take you that," as it struck someone. If it said, "Take you that till you get more," further blows would descend upon the unfortunate victim. Mud was flung in the face of those at prayer. The more prayers were offered up, the worse the violence became. The belief that they must be witnessing a great battle between good and evil must have been reinforced among their present on Friday, the 26th, when the spirit began to abuse them, calling them witches and works promises to take them to hell. Andrew Mackie, who had been asleep, was waking in time to hear it say, "Thou shalt be troubled till Tuesday." "Who gave thee a commission?" Mackie demanded. "God gave me a commission," said the voice, "and I am sent to warn the land to repent. For judgment is to come if the land do not quickly repent, and I will return 100 times worse upon every family in the land." Next when the voice changed its tone. "Praise me, and I will whistle to you. Worship me, and I will trouble you no more." Mac replied, "The Lord who delivered the 3 children out of the fiery furnace delivered me and this night from the temptations of Satan." The spirit mocked him back. "You might as well have said Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." When another neighbor tried to speak to it, it rounded on him. "You are basely bred, and meddling in other men's discourse, wherein you are not concerned. Remove your goods, for I will burn the house." The man answered, "The Lord stop Satan's fury and hinder him of his designs." "I will do it," the spirit insisted. Then was heard no more. Next day the house caught fire no fewer than 7 times. The day after, a Sunday, the family neighbors worked all day putting out one fire after another. When the spirit realized it could not burn the house, it grew frustrated and pulled down the stonework at one end of the building, forcing the people to retreat to the stable. While they were there, the spirit pulled one child from its makeshift bed and suspending a great beam above the others, cried, "If I had a commission, I would brain them." On the Monday, the fires continued. Andrew Mackie, determined to put an end to it, extinguished their own fire and made sure there was no possible source of fire within a quarter mile of the house. Yet, still, the fires would break out. Somehow, Mackie tried to carry on with his work. He was threshing in the barn when he heard the spirit whisper to him, "Andrew, Andrew," but he ignored it. More angrily, the spirit said, "Speak," but he refused to acknowledge it. As it said, "Be not troubled. You shall have no more trouble, except some casting stones on Tuesday to fulfill the promise. Take away your straw." Late that night, the Reverend Telfair, Macklin, and others gathered once again, but the trouble had subsided. There was only some stone throwing, which by this time must have seemed an almost welcome relief. On Tuesday night, Charles Macklin led their family neighbors in prayer in the barn. First he and then the others observed a black thing in the corner, which slowly grew until it seemed it would fill the whole building, but which did not seem to have any distinct form. It was like a black cloud from which barley, chaff, and mud were thrown at the people. The cloud seemed to grip at some around their torsos and arms so painfully that the ache stayed with them for 5 days thereafter. But then the cloud dissipated and all was quiet again. On the Wednesday, the 1st of May, the sheep house was again fired, although the sheep were rescued, and the building was burnt to the ground. It seemed to be the spirit's last act. All the activity ceased, and the Mackies were able to resume a normal life. What happened at Green Crops of Stocking will remain a mystery, but that something extraordinary took place there is unquestionable. Alexander Telfair's account, written soon after the events, is attested by 14 other witnesses, including 5 ministers. The original document was signed by these and many others, all of whom were identified by name and place of residence. For many years, the Encyclopedia Britannica listed the rare case as the particularly good example of a poltergeist, although the violence was so extreme that it seems that something more than a mere adolescent disturbance was afoot. So, it was a well attested to event that happened there. So, it would be something if a lot of people had gotten together and made up the story, and that was a way to kick it off. Alright, now, I promised you last week Ozark Ghost Stories. There was another variant of the juniper tree in here that I wanted to read to you. This one has a more grisly ending. Ghastly ending. This one is titled Pennywinkle. Pennywinkle. A young woman bore a son, but died shortly afterwards. Her husband buried her in the graveyard and found a widow woman with a young daughter and asked her to be his wife. She accepted and the two came to live in the cabin, but the stepmother hated the boy that wasn't hers. She never mistreated the boy inside of his father, but when the man was away, she was mean to that boy. As the boy grew older, she hated him all the more. She wished he'd die, so her daughter would get all the care in the household. That spring, the man bought a suckling pig and brought him to the home to fatten in a pen. When the woman got mad at the boy, she'd go outside and beat the pig. He didn't dare beat the boy for fear the man would find out. One day, the man said it was time to butcher the piglet, and he went out to pound the bottom land far piece away. While he was gone, the young daughter was at school. The mean woman went out to butcher the piglet. She opened the pen, but the pig feared her so that it squealed and ran him between the legs out the gate and into the woods. She couldn't find the She opened the pen, but the piglet hit through so hard by then that it squealed and ran between her legs out the gate and into the woods. Couldn't find the pig, and didn't dare explain why a pig would run from food. She called the young boy out to the pen and hit him in the head with the maul like she would have done to the pig. Cut his throat and bled him out. And she butchered the boy like he was a pig and cooked up the meat. Man didn't favor hard liver, so she put the liver and lungs and the goozle and windpipes into a flour sack along with the head. When her daughter came home, she said, "Take the sack apart and bury it under the broken marble cooling stone out by the shed. I don't want no flies, nor no dogs dragging pig innards around the house yard." The daughter did as she was told, but had to struggle to lift the slab of marble. When the sack was buried, she dropped the slab back into the hollow it had made over the years, where pennywinkles blew around it. Pennywinkles are a little blue flower, so that's what that is. Still a weird thing there. Okay. When the father came home, he asked about his son. Your boy went to sassing me, and when I spoke sharply to him, he went out the door and swore he'd never come back, said the woman. I gotta go looking for him, said the father. That neat first, said the woman with an evil smile. Then we'll all go. After they'd all ate their fill, the woman said she couldn't go out after all, and she was having a sick spell. She packed another flour sack with cooked meat for the man. He told the daughter to stay behind with her mother. He took the sack of meat and biscuits and set out to look for the boy. The mother went to bed and began to have nightmares. The daughter blew out the lamp and went to sleep on her own bed after a while. Deep in the night, she woke to a small, clear voice saying, "Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle, my ma killed me, my pa ate me, and my sister buried me beneath the slab. I want my liver and lights and winey pipes. Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle." They knew that little voice. As she sat up, a little pile of pennywinkle flowers fell from her chest. Knowing what had happened and what she'd done, she looked over at her mother in the darkness. Mother didn't stir, and didn't seem to hear. The girl got up and put on her shoes and grabbed her shawl and ran out the door as quiet as she could. She ran and ran down the hallway to find her stepfather. The man had searched and called, but couldn't find his son. After he sat down in a willow tree and ate some of the meat and biscuits, planning to sleep a spell. He'll get up to searching again. As he slept, he had a dream. He heard a small voice call to him, "Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle, my ma killed me, my pa ate me, and my sister buried me beneath the slab. I want my liver and lights and winey pipes. Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle." The man sat bolt upright. A little part of Pennywinkle's fell off his overalls bib. He knew what had happened and what he had done. Just then his stepdaughter came running through the tree. He's in the moonlight calling to him. He grabbed her and hugged her harder, and they told each other what they'd heard. "I was so scared," said the girl. "I ran to you to help me." They started back to the cabin through the dim, brushy woods. The woman stirred into sleep, and the voice called to her, "Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle, my ma killed me, my pa ate me, and my sister buried me beneath the slab. I want my liver and lights and whining pipes. Pennywinkle, Pennywinkle." Sat up in the bed. The cabin was black as sin. Something stood at the foot of her bed. The father and the daughter ran into the house yard. The father took up the axe from the chopping block that came slowly into the dark cabin. The woman was in bed and did not stir. The father held the axe up as the daughter lit the lamp from a sulphur match. The woman was on the bed with her eyes wide open. Her throat was cut, and she had bled her head out all in a pool that ran the mattress there and dripped on the wood floor. In her right hand she held her butcher knife, clawed with her own blood. Her other hand she crushed a handful of pennywinkles. So, whew. Alright, there's no I'm going to read here that it. There's a section here called Truthful Tales, which is like stories from first-hand responders or ones that have been documented uh, well enough to know that these are true. Um, so you might see this illustration here that shows a face in smoke from a building that's on fire. And that is the story I'm going to read because it's a little disturbing. Okay, the ghost of Floyd Eddings. One of the strangest stories told in the Ozarks is about the Floyd Eddings. Floyd was the son of Doc Eddings, then got into the 1880s and was lodged in the Old County Jail at Old Carrollton. In the early 1800s, Carrollton had been the county seat of Carroll County, Arkansas, and for half a century through the Civil War, it was the seat of justice. After Boone County was founded, head carved from the eastern half of Carroll, the seat was moved west to Berryville, and but the old jail was still sometimes used for local prisoners being transferred to Berryville. The jail at Old Carrollton was a marvel, hailed as escape-proof. The walls were 3 logs thick, with the outer and inner layers of log being horizontal, and the internal layer being vertical. There was only one opening, an iron door that was locked with a heavy padlock on the outside. During daylight hours, the jail was intended outside the log building, but at night, the prisoner was locked in and on his own. Only one person was usually kept in the 18-foot by 18-foot interior. In the cemetery that in the century that has passed, the details of the event have become blurred. Some folks say the cell was being heated with a wood stove and the stove caught the building on fire. Others say the prisoner was set the fire planning to burn his way out on escape when he planning to burn his way out or escape when he was out of the burning building. Still, other opponents say opponents in inter-family feud denied the jail for revenge against Old Doc. What did happen for that is known for sure is this. Deep in the night, the jailhouse was on fire, and before the screams of help could awaken the community and bring the jail with a key, the log fortress was consumed in flame, and Floyd Eddings was burned alive. When the fire was extinguished and the door cooled down enough to be opened, the charred corpse of the boy was brought out. Here the versions of the story differ. Some say the boy had written on the floor of the jail the words to about himself. Others say the ballad was written on a piece of paper, touched slightly in one charred hand, its edges burned away. Some say balladeer wrote it after the fact. There is no explanation, but here are the lyrics to the mournful song, sent to 2 different tunes by different storytellers today. Since Floyd was barely literate, the spelling has been cleaned up. My name is Floyd Eddings. I'm the son of Old Doc. He newly did disown me, but I'm one of his flock. Hell is my portion. I go naked without a cent. For in old Carroll town, a robin I went. I went to Green Forest and hurried to work. They come and handcuffed me and took me to court. They summoned a jury, never cost them 1 cent. And for a little court to Berryville I went. When court was over, to old Carrollton I returned, and there in the jailhouse to death I was burned. They brought me my supper and locked the door fast, and left me there lonely to think on my past. I sent for my father, I thought it all well, but he never came nigh me, and I wished him in hell. No father, no mother, no money to spend. They left me here lonely, myself to defend. The jailhouse caught fire, I called out for help. They help. They never come nigh me, and just lay there and slept. The plague jail went after the key. He never did find it till the jail fire burnt me. I laid on the floor, my blanket wrapped around. They never come nigh me till the jailhouse burnt down. Whatever Floyd's crimes, for which he was disowned by his father, they were still probably no more than a simple robbery. Certainly, few people believe that criminals should be burned alive, and the public quickly caught on to the ballad and sang it softly about a ne'er-do-well who got worse than he deserved. It seems very unlikely that a fire hot enough to char the body the way it is described would not burn a piece of paper in the boy's hand. It seems very unlikely that he could write so calmly and eloquently on the floor of a burning jail. A balladeer could have composed a song from the viewpoint of the boy after his death had already occurred. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the ghost of Floyd Eddings who dictated the song to the balladeer. Hey. Ooh. There's a lot of really good stuff in here, so if you can find this book on a for sale, yeah, pick it up. There's like one last one. It might not be here. My neighbor is talking. My neighbors move around, so it's a little weird right now. Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna read the story Mary Calhoun here. However, there's a really good illustration in Ozark Tall Tales, which has the same story, which, if you've been following my videos here, you remember that, yeah, Richard and Julie Dockwell Young would often use the same story in different collections because there was a lot of crossover in what they did. I have a few more books I don't have that I want to pick up and stuff from there because Halloween's coming around again next year. We do a volume 2 sometime. All right. So, here is the illustration. Might look a little disturbing. Good reason. Famous story is Mary Calhoun. Once there came to these hills an old family by the name of Calhoun. The old man was walking through the graveyard on the hilltop one Halloween about sundown. He sat down on a tombstone to rest for a minute, and when he got to go, he left his walking stick behind. When he got to the cabin, he missed the stick and asked his eldest girl, Mary, to go fetch it. She obliged, and walked up the hill in the dusky dark, and through the iron gate into the graveyard. The stick had fallen over, kind of down into a crack where an old grave was caving in. When she bent over to pick it up, something grabbed the hem of her dress. She stood up suddenly, too scared to scream, and something all bony and husky climbed up her desk and onto her back. It was shriveled and hardly weighed a thing, and it spoke to her. "Bear me out of here," said the thing into her ear. "I have not eaten a morsel in many a year." Mary tried to disobey, but she couldn't. She walked stiff-legged down the path toward the houses beyond the field. "Turn in here," said the thing as they come to a gate, and then, "No," it wailed. "There's holy water here." "Turn in here," it said the next gate. Then, "No, there's holy water in here too." "Turn in here," the thing said to the third house, and Mary done as it bade. "No holy water here," it said. Mary knew this house and the folks that dwelt in it, and they had 3 fine sons. The thing on her back said, "Into the kitchen and get a butcher knife." She found one, and had a bowl. She got one. "Upstairs," said the thing, and up she went, unwilling. There were the 3 sons asleep in their beds. "Cut his throat," said the thing, and he did it all against her will. Out came 3 drops of blood into the bowl. The first one came, and the boy stirred. The second one came, and the boy was pale. The third one came, and the boy was dead. He did the same to to the other 2. "To the kitchen," said the thing. He went down. "Build a fire," it said. "Stir the coals. Make gruel," it said, "with the blood." When the oatmeal was boiled with the blood, the thing bade her set the table. She laid out the bowls and spoons. "Save my supper." She poured a parcel out the oatmeal. "Take a bite." After a spoonful of the bloody gruel, but her hand was shaking so hard she brought half the morsel. It fell in the fold of her kerchief. "You're mine now," said the thing, and it climbed down and sat in a chair and commenced eating its oatmeal. It didn't dare look at the thing all dried up and powerful old. It ate and ate. It did the same, but each bite she dropped it into her kerchief when it wasn't looking. It could control her now, but she didn't let it know. "Now you've ate the blood," the thing said, childlike. "You're one of us. You can know all that we know. You'll never tell." The thing put its spoon down and wiped its mouth. If there'd been any left of that oatmeal, it could have brought the boy to life again. The thing laughed, and it sounded like the wind in the corn stalks. "I've ate it," said. "Back to the grave." "I'll take up first," said Mary Calhoun, and put up the bowls and spoons in the basin, and folded her kerchief and laid it down in the cupboard alongside the rags. As the she got there, and the thing took no heed. "Up now," said the thing, climbing her dress and standing on her back, and to the grave. Once it touched her again, the thing held sway over her, and he did as it bade. To the grave it went. "Be that kind," the thing said. "Under those stoves I hid all the gold oh God I had I hidden life." The thing laughed, and that sounded like rattlers in the wind. "Little it served me, but you'll not tell." They came to the grave all caved in. "Hey," said the thing, "it's almost dawn." The thing climbed off and crawled into the crack. As soon as it left her, it couldn't bid her. "Come down," said the thing. "No," said Mary Calhoun, taking up her father's stick. "Come down," said the thing. "You ate the blood." "No," said Mary Calhoun. "Not a morsel." "Come down," said the thing, and grabbed hold over him. He struck him with a stick, and sure hard of it flew, but it still pulled. "No," said Mary Calhoun, and a shaft of sunlight struck the crack as dawn came over the hilltop. The thing let out a scream and fell away into the grave. Mary Calhoun ran back to the house. The family was weeping away over the dead boys. "They're not dead," said Mary Calhoun. "They swooned is all. I'll take up a rag and a bowl of water." "You're daft," said the father. "They're dead." Mary Calhoun wept alone, with the oatmeal in the kerchief. She put one by her head in each boy's mouth, and then wet his brows to wake him. Each boy stirred, each boy swallowed, and each boy woke. Mary Calhoun took her father's stick and went home. She never married, never had no children. She saved her pennies and bought the fallow by the hilltop. She came into some money, no one knew how. She made a fine house and lived a long life, but she shunned the company of other folk, and she never entered the graveyard again. Whew. Yeah, the wording is a little different in the Ozark Ghost Stories version. The Lord is still the same and told very much beat for beat, but some of the wording is a little different. So it's in one case, but they didn't just straight up use the same thing. Okay. We need one more story to kind of wrap this up, I think. Or at least some smaller, short ones. Okay. So from the Scary Story Reader, here is The Skull in the Road. That's part of here. Long ago in the mountains of Colorado, there were many people who disappeared and whose bodies were never found. They found in mine shafts, were killed by Indians upon whose land they trespassed, or murdered for their gold nuggets. So much was surprised to be walking along a dirt path in the hills and come across private skeleton uncovered by the spring rains. No one was surprised they came upon a skull lying in the road, but they were surprised after they stepped over it, walked on, and looked back. It was sitting in the road right behind them. There was a skull that did this. If you saw it and walked past, spent 20 steps or so and turned around, it was really right behind you. You can never see it move when you look back. It was right behind you, looking at you. The only way to get away was to run off the road and through the rocks. The skull couldn't follow you there. One day, a man named Juan was walking along the path. He came around a corner, and there was a skull lying the road in front of him, its hollow eyes toward him. Juan stood for a moment, and remembering the skull that follows you, decided to give this skull no chance to do that. Juan instead of hit forward and gave the skull a hard kick. The skull sailed far ahead of him and landed in the road again. Juan walked up and spoke to it. Well, sinuous skull, I don't seem to be able to get rid of you. Out of the skull came a voice deep like the roaring of a fire. I would have used sinew and wand to kick me for no reason. Wand dropped his pack and started head back in fear. But realizing he ought not to show such fear in the face of something supernatural, he quickly spoke again. You started me, sinuous skull. I did not realize what a wise and able skull you were. I apologize for kicking you. It was thoughtless of me. Allow me to make it up to you. Please come to my cabin this evening for supper. Thinking that the skull could not travel far in such short time, and that without a lower jaw, the skull could not eat much at all, Juan tipped his hat and quickly went on his way. He had almost forgotten his unnatural conversation as he sat at his table in front of the fire of his cabin, his stew boiling in a pot. Then there was a knock at his door. Juan's hand trembled with fear as he watched the door and opened it. Outside there lay a skull on the ground, his hollow eye socket staring toward him. Then from along the door frame, out of the darkness, stepped a skeleton without a skull, wearing a long winter cloak. The skeleton bent down and picked up the skull and set it on its neck of bones. The skeleton pulled a lower jawbone out of the pocket of the cloak and fastened it to the bottom of its skull. Eyeballs slowly rose to the skull eye sockets and looked at one. The lower jawbone worked as the skeleton spoke. I've come for supper, Senor Juan. Juan stepped back and the skeleton came in and sat down. Juan put two bowls on the table and with his hands shaking, filled the bowls with stew. Juan sat nervously and watched the skull. It lifted one spoonful of stew to its teeth and poured the stew over the jawbone. Incredibly, the stew disappeared, but Juan could never figure out where it went. At the end of the meal, Juan pushed his bowl away and looked at the skeleton. The skull spoke again. Now that I have enjoyed so fine a supper in your home, I invite you to join me for supper in my home. The skeleton stood, bowed politely, and walked out the door. Juan breathed a huge sigh of relief. 1 week later, on a Sunday, Juan was walking past the graveyard coming home from a visit to town. Suddenly he heard something calling his name. He turned and looked in the dim light of dark and saw the skeleton in the long cloak standing among the gravestones and crosses. The skeleton waved its arms slowly, gesturing for Juan to come in. No matter how hard Juan tried, he could not keep from turning. He could not keep from walking to the gate of the graveyard. He could not keep his feet from walking slowly among the stones, approaching the skeleton in the cloak. A moment later, Juan stood before a grave with a capstone of hewn rock. The skeleton bent down and lifted the horribly heavy stone without any seeming effort. As the stone rose up like a trapdoor to the basement, a deep red light poured out. Smoke with a solid burning sulfur billowed out from the grave. You have made me welcome in your house, Senor Juan, and now I make you welcome in mine, said the skeleton, gesturing downward to the flames below. Juan stood, paralyzed with terror, sweat streaming down on his face from fear and incredible heat. The fires below the earth. With much effort, Juan spoke. Is there any way I could decline your kind invitation? The skeleton stood motionless for a long time. The flames licked up out of the grave. Then spoke very slowly. Never show disrespect for the dead. Juan shook his head, seeing sweat in all directions. I swear I will never disrespect the dead again. The skeleton let go of the stone, which fell with a huge thud, smothering the flames. The skeleton fell into 200 separate bones that rattled and clattered as they hit the earth. The long cloak dropped to the dirt, empty. Slowly Juan picked up the bones and wrapped them in the cloak. He struggled out of the stone under which there was nothing but a small, shallow hole, cold and stinking. Slowly Juan laid the cloak full of bones into the hole and ever so gently lowered the stone of the hole. The edges of the stone room cut his fingers, and his blood ran down the capstone, dripped into the hole as he lowered the stone, but he dared not drop it. The stone touched the earth as silently as falling rose petals. Slowly, one stood up, out of the graveyard. What do you think of that story, Susie? Not enough cats for your liking? Okay, so yeah, that. So those are the scary stories I decided to read this year. I kind of wish I'd done more with Jack Snow. There's some really good stuff, but hey, maybe next year I'll have a little bit more to say about Mr. Snow. Alright. Do you have a scary story you want to tell, Susie? Okay, so I'd like to go on and do more streams in November. I'm not sure if I want to read a book or anything. Maybe I could just tell some stories from my own room or something. And I want to just do this, while it would be great to like build a nice audience and you know, or do that. think I'm mainly going to do this for myself. That I want to keep in practice with speaking, making sure that my voice can be heard because it kind of sucks when you fall out of practice. I'm gonna try to be doing streams of podcast recordings. I need to get a podcast out. So, all right, Susie is demanding my attention right now. I'll go ahead and end the stream. Looks like I have one viewer. Thanks for showing up. Go ahead and have a great Halloween. I thought it would have been fun to read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow on stream, but eh, bit of a longer short story.